Welcome everybody to this showcase video of our NAVsuite software from OxTS. This will be a brief introduction to our complementary software suite, which we call NAVsuite. This software is free to download, no license is required. You can go straight to our website. I'll show at the end where to go onto our support site and download it without a license. And there's some sample data that you can also make use of to play around with. So on the screen now you can see what we call NAVstart. So it's essentially a list of the applications that are part of NAVsuite. We've got NAVconfig, NAVdisplay, NAVsolve, NAVgraph, and those are the applications that I'll be talking about throughout this video. NAVsuite is essentially all the software you need to configure, monitor, process data from OxTS INS devices and analyze data as well. So we'll go through these. So firstly, we'll see NAVconfig. So it's in the name. What it does is configure your INS device. So it sets up the interfaces and it's going to tell you or tell the device exactly how it's mounted on a vehicle and connected to other devices, things like this. So this will be the starting application. You would connect your INS by Ethernet to your PC and open NAVconfig. That would be the first step. You'll just need to make sure that your PC is on the same IP range as the INS, so that would be 192.168.1. The serial number. And here you have to put in various measurements. So I'll start to show you what these might be. So you would start with the hardware setup measurement. So that's the orientation of the INS on the vehicle, where it's pointing, where it is with respect to the axles, if you're on a land vehicle, for example, where the antennas are with respect to the INS, these kinds of measurements. So you would do those things first thing, and then you would move on to other settings such as differential corrections to get your centimeter level accuracy. You might have a LiDAR scanner if you wanted to set up your PPS, NMEA, PTP connections, things like this. All of this can be done in NAVconfig. You've also got settings for your environment. So how good are the GNSS setting conditions rather. You can tell the device and it will change how it reacts to GNSS updates, things like this, all to get the maximum accuracy out of your device and to get exactly what you want out of it. So all of this is done in NAVconfig, and it's a really convenient way of doing it all. So there are advanced settings as well. We won't go into all of these, but you can change all sorts just in NAVconfig in this user interface. So that would be the first step, and then you would go on to commit the changes, commit your configuration to the device. The device will reset, and then it will be waiting for an initialization, which is an important step in using an OxTS INS device. So initialization is the initial heading lock, and that will be something that if you're using a land vehicle, you might monitor in NAVdisplay, which I'll go on to in a moment. So NAVdisplay, if I remove NAVconfig, is essentially a way of monitoring the device in real time. So you are able to, if I just play this back, so I'm not driving now, I'm just watching some data that I've recorded earlier, but this is what you would see in real time. So you would see the number of satellites, the speed, the heading pitch roll, the heading accuracy, pitch accuracy, roll accuracy, all these things. And this is entirely configurable for the user. So I could add any number of measurements in any number of different displays. So if there's a certain parameter measurement that you want to keep an eye on, you can do that, and you can do it in a number of different ways, such as a graph or a digital display anything really that you can think of. If I just show you a few of the options that you've got, you can add any one of these measurements. You can see how many there are, several hundred different things that you might want to monitor, just so you know that you've got absolutely everything you need to know that your survey is going well. So that's NAVdisplay, and you would use this for many things. You can use this for. Typically, you might use this if you're doing a warm-up. So when you first use your device after using NAVconfig, you do the initialization, which would be if you're doing a dynamic initialization, you drive in a straight line, and this NAVdisplay would tell you when the device is initialized, and then you would do a warm-up. So 1 to 3 minute warm-up perhaps if you're using the XNAV 650, and you would use this. Looking at these accuracies here, you might use these to gauge when the warm-up is complete. So for example, this data is for a Survey Plus, and you can look on the data sheet for the specification. It's 1 centimeter accurate, and you can see the device is reporting about 8 millimeters north accuracy, 6 millimeters east accuracy. The heading accuracy specification is 0.01, 0.1 rather, and you can see that it's at 0.06 essentially at the moment. So you would know that after you've done your warm-up that you are getting exactly what you want. So then you would go, after you've collected your data, so the device is always logging data automatically. So it's got an internal storage, 32 gigabytes, and as soon as you turn it on, it will be logging data continuously. And simply when you're done at the end of your survey, you retrieve the data off the device. So I've got a screenshot here of what you would do. You would simply set up an FTP connection. So that'd be, you could go into File Explorer, FileZilla, whatever it might be, set up an FTP connection to your IP address, and you'll see all the files that are stored on the device, and you'll have a list of all the RD files that are stored on the device. If you're using a LiDAR and you're logging data onto the device as well, which you can do for, say, a VLP16 LiDAR, you'll also have your list of LCOM files, which will be logging also automatically as soon as the device is on and the devices are connected. So after you've done your survey, you can retrieve these straight off the device via an Ethernet connection, and then you're ready to process. So to process, you would be using NAVsolve. So we've gone from NAVconfig before your survey, NAVdisplay during your survey, and then you would move on to NAVsolve. So this is, you might guess, it's going to process that data. So what we've downloaded from the device is a .rd file, which is a raw data file, and we need to process that into a .ncom file. So the ncom file is our file format. It's got all the data that you saw on NAVdisplay. All of that is visible in the ncom file format and retrievable easily. So what we're going to do is essentially process that. So you can view the file, see a few different parameters in it, but the processing is really as simple as pressing a button. If you've got your configuration is all correct from NAVconfig, and you've added your base stations, which you can do very easily simply by directing your NAVsolve to the folder that you might have the base station Rhinex files in, and then you would simply select your base stations and click process, and that would be it. So you do have a chance also to change your configuration before processing, in post-processing. So if you've made a mistake in your configuration with your measurements, for example, you don't have to go out and do it all again. You can review the config. This will open up NAVconfig. You can modify the configuration and just change those measurements, and that will be used in the processing. So if I just show you, you could change, for example, you realize this was actually facing the other way, you could just change that. NAVconfig also has an option for an improved configuration. So what the device will be doing in real time is constantly improving the parameters that you've put in. So you might measure, say, the antenna to be 1 meter away from the INS, but it might actually be 1.02 meters from the INS. And when you want to get the centimeter level accuracy in your survey, obviously you need to get that more precise. But the INS is going to be doing that automatically. So typically you would only need to measure, say, to the nearest 10 centimeters, and then the INS will do that. As you do the warm-up, it's figuring out exactly what the configuration is. And using this improve configuration button, what that does is simply save those improved measurements to the device. So it thinks it's got those improved measurements instead of the ones that you put in initially. And then after doing that, you can process your data. You've got a few options, which I won't go into much detail on, but it really is that simple. So after using NAVsolve, you can then use NAVgraph. So NAVgraph would be software for analyzing your data. And what you would do is open your NCOM file in NAVgraph, and it would simply display different measurements and different parameters of your choosing. And you have some options for exporting to different data types and things like this. So again, you have these many different measurements and parameters that the device is always monitoring. So you've got your latitude, longitude, you've got your position accuracies, your pitch accuracies. All these things can be measured throughout the survey. And what you can see on the screen here now is a position accuracy for this survey. So you can see we've driven this route here. And what you can see are position accuracies for that same data that I showed you in NAVdisplay. So the green is a altitude accuracy. You can see that's a bit below 2 centimeters for the whole survey. And you've also got the position accuracy east, I think this is, in red, and that's about 7 millimeters, 6 or 7 millimeters throughout the whole survey, except of course for these spikes. So something that you might want to do is try to understand exactly what happened at different points in the survey. So you can drag a cursor and you can see, okay, so this peak here happened when I was at this point in the survey, and I happen to know that there was a forest here. So what's happened is I've lost satellite signals and I've been relying on the IMU, and you can see that there's a spike in the data until I get the GNSS coverage back. So something that you can do is export to different file types. You've got a .kml, you've got a CSV, and you can really you can export to a CSV any of the data that you've collected. So you could modify this table. You can see you can configure the table, choose your different measurements, choose the units. You can do the same with the graph, configure the graph, all different measurements, whatever you might want to put on there, and then you can export these so you can analyze this data. So for example, you might export to a KML file. I didn't know that was a forest, so I'm going to have a look at some satellite imagery. So I saw that the peak in the data was here, and you can see that was indeed a forest that we drove through there before surveying this town here. So that is NAVsuite in a nutshell. I didn't go into any detail on what you can do, but you can see how the suite of software takes you from setup to analyzing your data. We have another application, software application, which is not part of NAVsuite, which is called OxTS Georeferencer. This is for LiDAR surveying. It's a very useful application for that, but it's not part of NAVsuite. NAVsuite is for our navigation data, and it's completely free. you can go onto our website. So I can show you that. Now you can see on our website, you can go very simply to the technical support site, to software, NAVsuite, and here you can download and you'll be able to get some sample data on there as well. This same data, which you'll be able to configure, view, process, and then analyze all by yourself, so you can get a good feel for this for the software. So thank you for watching, and I hope you'll enjoy using NAVsuite.